Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
This episode of Drew Blood's Dark Tales is brought to you by Hymns. Ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? It's time to quit worrying about your performance and link up with our friends at Hymns. Personalized, doctor-trusted ED treatments delivered right to your door. No office visits required. And most importantly, no more awkward apologies in the bedroom. All the confidence you need to get hard and stay that way with Hymns. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/Drew. That's HIMS.com/Drew for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/Drew.
The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Welcome, friends. Here we are halfway through October. The nights are cool and crisp, the clouds pass before the moon like watered ink, and we're selling boner pills like they're going out of style. What could be better, Chester? No, I don't believe these hard mints were designed for alligators, Chester. You stay out of these. Don't touch them, all right? Well, let's head in, friend. We've got a very special story for you tonight. All right, that's better. Hey, Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights has a big anthology book full of your favorite stories. Take a second and visit chillinbook.com to check it out. Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights 30 Tales of Terror contain just that, 30 tales never before available in print by some of the most prolific and talented authors of the online community, each one accompanied by a suitably grim illustration by David Romero. And speaking of grim illustrators, tonight our pal Robert Pangbourne brings us another one of Frederick's stories. Frederick, who sadly passed away last September, ain't going anywhere. Not if we have anything to do with it. So smoke 'em if you got 'em and drink those glasses to the bottom, y'all. 'Cause old Drew Blood has a tale to tell. In this one, we join an archivist at a museum, and a brand new artifact seems to have caught his eye. So without further delay, from the immortal author, Frederick Pangbourne, I give you What's in a Name?
Is this what all the excitement is about?
Asked Oliver as he eyed the ancient amulet in its newly housed glass case. Ian Maxwell looked up from his paperwork at his desk to the young archivist of the museum. Oliver Seller was a tall, thin man in both height and frame. His face was as delicate and pale as his physical appearance, his black hair neatly combed to the side, his dark eyes set above the even darker lines beneath them.
Yes, it's just arrived on Tuesday. A fascinating piece, is it not?
Replied Maxwell. Oliver leaned over the case and moved his face close to the glass.
Extremely. Have they authenticated the metal and gem?
Yes, the metal of both the chain and medallion are pure silver. The stone, as you can surmise, is a ruby.
The amulet rested on a tiny black felt pillow within its glass confines. It was a geometric design of an upside-down triangle, with the lower pointed tip wrapping out into curled horns, with other pointed and angular curves emerging and twisting together from the triangle sides. A polygon-shaped ruby was fixed into the top of the major design. The amulet itself was approximately 4 inches in height and 3 in width. The long, thick rope chain of the same metal sat coiled to the pendant's side.
Is it true what's being said about it? Being a cursed item.
Oliver stood up straight and turned away from the glass face and faced Maxwell behind his large mahogany desk. Maxwell pulled his tiny wire-framed glasses from his plump face. He was a portly man in his mid-60s, with a round, balding head which sported a wreath of white hair, his girth stretching the material of his gray three-piece suit.
I wouldn't go as far as to say the item is cursed.
Oliver nodded at his incorrect wording and rephrased his question.
Is it true that death follows those who come into possession of this artifact?
Well, the item itself is not cursed as you asked, but it is said that those who possess both the amulet and the knowledge regarding it shall obtain the power to cause the death of others. It is written in a scroll which was unearthed along with the artifact that a powerful demon is imprisoned within the stone, and when its name is spoken aloud, that it will be released where it will devour the desired victim before it is once more pulled back into the gem.
Interesting.
Oliver turned at the waist and glimpsed the glass case behind him.
And this scroll?
I have it locked in my desk for the time being. It will be sent for carbon dating sometime this week before they will be displayed on the museum floor. I'll have the records sent to your department as soon as they complete their findings. The origins of both the artifact and scroll have been determined to be from ancient Mesopotamia.
Maxwell leaned forward and rested his arms on the surface of his desk and sighed.
But as you are well aware, that,
he pointed a finger at the glass stand,
is not the reason I called you up here. Take a seat, please.
I prefer to stand, thank you.
Very well. It has come to my attention by some of the female staff here that you have been...
Maxwell thought of a tactful way of phrasing the words.
Making unwanted advances toward them, and though there have been no official reports filed, there have been many verbal complaints. Every complaint is taken seriously and must be acted upon. Thus the reason you are here now. Is there any truth to these accusations, Seller?
Oliver shook his head, his face never changing its demeanor.
None whatsoever, Mr. Maxwell. Pardon my saying, but I find most of the female staff here at the museum to be disdainful and condescending. They don't appeal to me at all.
I see,
Maxwell replied, and leaned back into his leather chair.
That is a bold statement, Seller. Nevertheless, I would recommend avoiding these disdainful women, as you kindly put it, and carry on about your business while here at the museum. Any more of these complaints may lead to something more than a mere verbal warning. Do I make myself clear?
Crystal.
Maxwell sat back up straight in his chair and donned his glasses as he gathered the loose papers scattered about his desk.
Very good. That will be all, Seller. I will have the records pertaining to the amulet and scroll sent to you as soon as they arrive. Good day.
Good day, sir.
And with that, Oliver turned and walked from the curator's office, his face taking on a menacing frown once he turned his back. The Archives Center was nestled in the museum's lower levels, as were most of the departments, such as the Division of Medicine and Science, Political and Military History, and off-site programs and projects amongst a few. Oliver had 3 junior staff members under him, and after this afternoon's meeting with Maxwell, they were the only ones doing anything of a constructive nature. The allegations Maxwell had presented to him had taken him off guard, and luckily, he had maintained not showing any emotion when they were brought into light. He mentally patted himself on the back for his unexpected fortitude. He began to sort through the faces in his memory and started assembling a list of the staff who may have stepped forward and spoken of his harmless actions. Sure, he flirted with many of the women here, but no more than the next man, and not once did any of them show any signs of being dissatisfied with his comments, or sometimes more than subtle actions. He would have to tread more carefully and determine which of the female staff were going to Maxwell behind his back. The very thought of these women smiling at him one moment and running to Maxwell behind his back was infuriating. His annoyance had grown so considerably that work was the furthest thing on his mind. After spending the next few hours stewing in his own personal frustrations, Oliver decided that what he needed was time away from his surroundings. He would approach Maxwell and request time off. A few days of mental leave is what he would propose, and that hopefully would put him right. He could not shake the lingering anger that rested on him like a cloak of aggravation. He would tell the curator that the accusations had made him unable to concentrate on his present duties. What was the worst a man could say? No. He looked up to the wall clock above his office door. Most of the staff were leaving for the day, and he excused himself from his department as he headed back upstairs to Maxwell's office. When he arrived, Maxwell's secretary, Christina, was already straightening up the folders of paperwork on her desk and putting things into desk drawers as she too was preparing to leave for the day. Oliver watched her from behind as his arrival had gone unnoticed by the young woman. Christina was in her mid-20s, a petite girl with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Oliver soaked her in as his eyes roamed up and down her stockinged legs and short black skirt. When he realized he was making it too obvious and had been standing there longer than necessary for a passerby to notice, he cleared his throat. The young woman flinched at the unexpected noise.
"Heavens above, Ollie!"
she exclaimed as she bolted up straight and placed a hand over her heart.
"You near scared the life out of me."
Oliver chuckled.
It was not my intention. I'm sorry. Is Mr. Maxwell busy? I'd like to have a quick word with him.
Christina laughed at her own scare.
"Mr. Maxwell left about half an hour ago."
She pointed to his closed door.
I see.
Oliver exhaled heavily and bit his lower lip as he stared at the door. Perhaps his trip upstairs was not a total loss. He turned his attention to Christina as she was securing the last of her papers in the desk. Her blouse drooped as she was bent over, exposing her ample breasts.
Christina, if you're not busy tonight, I'd...
"Ollie, would you do me a big favor?"
She suddenly asked, as if not hearing him.
Of course.
"Would you watch my things for a moment while I run to the ladies' room? I should have gone earlier, but was so caught up with things and..."
Oliver held up his hand.
I totally understand. Run along. I'll stand guard while you're away.
"Oh, thank you. You're a sweetheart."
And with that, she scurried off down the hall. He stood there in silence as he waited, thinking how her firm, naked body would feel under him when his gaze fell upon a key ring left on the desk. His eyes darted from the keys to the curator's office, then back to the keys. He listened for any sound of her return, and when there was none, he quickly lifted the keys from the desk and moved toward the door as his fingers went through the numerous keys on the ring. He tried only 3 keys before the correct one slid into the lock. Unlocking the door, he rushed back to the desk and set the keys back onto its surface, just as he heard the door to the ladies' room open and the sound of the running hand dryer blowing in the distance.
"Thank you so much, Ollie,"
Christina said as she rounded the corner and snatched up the key ring and began locking her desk drawers.
Not a problem,
he replied with a smile.
Well, I guess I'll try again tomorrow morning. Get home safely.
He winked and turned down the hall as she was gathering her coat and purse. He quickly slid into the men's room and waited until he heard her heels on the tiled floor fade down the hall. Even after she was apparently gone, He lingered a few minutes longer, in case in her hasty departure she had forgotten something and came back. When her heels did not return, he emerged from the restroom and made his way back to the office. Silent as a serpent, he entered Maxwell's gloomy office and closed the door behind him. Blindly, he carefully felt his way about in the dark until he felt the edge of the desk and slowly guided his hand to the desk lamp and turned it on. He stood in the poorly lit office and looked about him. He relished in his own ingenuity and cleverness. Seating himself in the curator's thick leather chair, Oliver pulled a small penknife from his pocket and proceeded to pry open the locks to the large desk drawers at his legs. To his luck, the small bone scroll tube was resting in the first drawer opened. He lifted it from the drawer and set it in the desk's light. Etchings of skulls and ancient symbols adorned the tube's surface. He ran his fingertips gently over the carvings, then opened the tube's end before carefully sliding out the rolled-up piece of time-worn parchment. Protectively, he unfurled it on the desk's surface. He instantly identified the faded language upon the scroll as Babylonian. He smiled. Utilizing a few items on the desktop such as a stapler and Maxwell's nameplate, he used them as paperweights to keep the scroll open as he stood from the desk and moved to the immense bookcase at one wall. Though the lighting was poor and he was forced to squint as he pressed his face close to the book's spines, he eventually came upon a volume of Babylonia translations. His smile broadened as he returned to the desk with the book. His luck seemed to have no boundaries. He looked at the small mantel clock on the desk. Its Roman numerals indicated 6:18. He had a good 12 hours to decipher the scroll and make off with the amulet. His agitation was no more. It was long washed away and replaced with a vengeful glee as he opened the book and proceeded with the translation. By the time he had completed the decryption of the scroll's instructions and its drawings, it was just before 9. He exhaled and rubbed the ball of his hands into his eyes. He had not realized how much time had passed. He lifted a small stationery pad from the desk and looked over the English translations he wrote upon the paper. Aramonolus, he said aloud a few times, trying to pronounce the demonic name correctly. When he was satisfied with the name, his gaze moved to the glass case. The case was locked from the back, and he knew that the key was in the possession of only Maxwell himself. He had come this far, and he intended on finishing what he had set in motion. Using a penknife, he pried open the remaining desk drawers and found the riveting hammer beneath some papers. The tool would do just fine. Pulling it from the desk, he walked to the glass case. Giving himself a safe distance from any flying shards of glass, he lifted the hammer and brought it down hard on the glass casing. The glass shattered loudly on the initial strike, and after 2 more swings of the hammer, only the back panel of glass remained intact. Tossing the hammer to the floor, Oliver pulled away the larger pieces of broken glass and lifted the amulet and its chain from the felt bed. The artifact felt heavier than it looked now that he held it. He was running his thumb over the ruby when the door to Maxwell's office flew open. The sudden action startled him, almost causing him to drop the amulet. He instantly recognized the individual behind the sudden intrusion as Rich Lamaker, one of the security guards at the museum. He was a sizable man in his late 40s with curly hair and a thick mustache. His shift had recently started, and he must have been on his first tour of the building when Oliver had destroyed the glass case. He placed his hand on the handgun strapped to his belt.
"Good evening, Richard. What an unexpected pleasure,"
Oliver calmly said. A smile grew on his face. A test subject had fallen into his lap.
Mr. Seller? What the hell's going on in here? This is Mr. Maxwell's office. How'd you get in?
Oliver began to loosen his tie and unbutton the top of his shirt.
"Oh, I let myself in. I just needed to borrow a few things."
Lemmiker's eyes darted to the smashed case and the glass spewed about the carpeting. He removed his gun from its holster and pointed it at Oliver.
I don't know what's going on here, Mr. Seller, but you'd best just stay where you are.
I was planning on just that.
Oliver draped a chain over his head and slid the amulet into his shirt.
And before you go turning me into the authorities, Richard, I'd like to see something first.
I can't let you take that necklace, so you'd best put it back, Mr. Seller.
Lemmiker's voice was losing its initial strength. The man was unsure of what to do next. It was the first time he had actually stumbled upon any type of crime being committed at the museum.
The scroll indicates that the amulet must be worn against bare flesh in order for the incantation to work.
Oliver slowly stepped to the desk and lifted the notepad.
Eramonolus, I call thee. Eramonolus, I free thee. Eramonolus, I feed thee.
Oliver read aloud from the pad.
Mr. Seller, I think it's best if you...
Without warning, the door to the office swung closed with a loud slam. Lemmiker instantly reached for the knob, but the door was now locked. The desk light began to flicker and fade. Oliver could feel the room suddenly becoming increasingly cold, his breath now visible in the air.
This episode of Drew Blood's Dark Tales is brought to you by Hims.
You know what's really the pits? When one of those spontaneous, intimate moments turns into you awkwardly explaining why you're softer than a cashmere sweater. Yeah, she's heard it a million times. This has never happened before, I swear. It's not you, it's me. I mean, it's never happened to me before, granted, but that doesn't mean it's you. Or me. Maybe it's just the Earth's magnetic field today. You've heard all about those solar storms going on. Those bedside sob stories never go over well, do they? Well, our pals at Hims are going to keep that from happening. Hims sends affordable and effective ED treatment straight to your door. No awkward visits to the doctor or even more awkward visits to the pharmacy. I've seen how that girl at the pharmacy looks at you. No sense in running your chances, know what I mean? The process is 100% online. Just answer a few questions on their website and a medical provider will determine your best option. They've got a whole range of doctor-trusted treatments, from Viagra to Cialis and all the generics for up to 95% cheaper. And chewable hard mints for when you're in a pinch, you know? Sometimes you gotta be ready at a moment's notice. And when that moment happens, a cat couldn't scratch it, believe me. No insurance necessary, and one low price covers your treatments and ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, all walking around like English pointers. Primed and ready for action. That could be you, pal. You'll be walking around town like a heat-seeking missile. How's that for a confidence booster? So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Drew. That's HIMS.com/Drew for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/Drew.
The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
The mere presence of the entity being expelled from its prison was draining the room of all energy, leaving it dark and cold. Oliver slowly stepped back to a corner of the room as the light died away, making visibility scarce. Lemmiker, sensing the impending dread in the air that was gathering strength, had dropped his gun and concentrated his efforts on frantically pulling at the doorknob. From the floor itself, an ominous figure rose into the room, as if emerging from a black pool of water. The immense figure continued to grow taller, as it made its presence into the material realm. A black humanoid shape void of any distinguishing features besides its large hulking mass. It reminded Oliver of a giant ape. As it came into being, 2 long horns grew from its head that stretched upward in an arch. Oliver could not make out any distinction if the entity was facing him or not. Lamaker could feel the change about him as a wave of negativity filled the room and turned around. The man's face displayed the most frightening expression Oliver had ever seen, and he closed his eyes and turned his face away from the man. He stayed that way even when he heard the screams and the sounds of his uniform being torn and the sickening noise of flesh being ripped away from bone. Long after the wails of agony had ceased and the devouring sounds faded, Oliver remained as still as a statue, daring not to move or bear witness to what had transpired. When the frigid chill subsided and heat returned to the room, Oliver opened his eyes. The room was as it was just prior to the guard entering. He exhaled loudly and looked about. Nothing had changed. The light had resumed its full illumination, and the room was deathly silent. Oliver stepped from the corner, glass crunching beneath his shoes, and pulled the amulet from inside his shirt. He gave it a quick examination. The amulet was no different either. He stepped to where Lamaker last stood and found nothing, not even a single drop of blood. He opened the door and peered out to where the secretary's desk sat. The foyer was empty and silent. Oliver laughed. It was too easy. Moving back into the office, he sat behind Maxwell's desk and slid the Rolodex in front of him where he began thumbing through its cards. First, he called Maxwell and informed him that security had found his office door forced open and that there had been some damage done. He himself was working late and saw security, who in turn informed him to contact the curator. When asked if the artifact had been affected, he simply told Maxwell that it was best if he just saw for himself. Once Maxwell stated that he was on his way, he waited 15 minutes, then called Christina. She was just getting ready for bed when he informed her that security had reported Maxwell's door being left unsecured and there was considerable damage done. The police had arrived and requested her presence since she possessed one of the few keys to the office. It sounded as if she were on the verge of tears when he hung up after she stated she would be there as soon as possible. Oliver leaned back in the leather chair and held the amulet in his hand, observing its intricate design. He now possessed the power of granting life or death by simply reciting a name. He chuckled. Could it really be this easy? He noticed the time on the mantel clock, and it cut his jubilation short as he saw that time was now of the essence. His first piece of business was to destroy the scroll. No one else could know of its knowledge or the forbidden name, and since he had written the translations, the ancient parchment was no longer needed. After a bit of searching through the desk, he came across a book of matches and set the scroll alight in the wastepaper basket. The aged parchment burned easily and quickly, as it was soon reduced to ashes. As he watched the flames consume the scroll, his thoughts drifted to Christina. He was still not sure why he had summoned her to the museum. He smiled to himself. That was not entirely true. He knew why, but how he would eventually approach the matter is what he was unsure of. He heard Maxwell's footsteps out in the hall sometime later and awaited his appearance while still seated in his chair with his feet up on the desk. Maxwell burst into the office and froze in the threshold, his hand still on the doorknob. The curator was no longer in his suit, but draped in a bathrobe and flannel pajamas. Oliver laughed at the sight.
Seller, what is the meaning of...
His voice trailed off at the sight of the smashed case, the shattered remains of the glass about the floor, and the rivet and hammer lying nearby. His mouth was agape as he took in the disorder.
The amulet! Was it stolen? Where is security?
He looked behind him, searching for the security staff.
The amulet is exactly where it needs to be,
Oliver boasted as he pulled it from the confines of his shirt and let it dangle by its chain.
Seller, have you gone insane? You did this?
The translations of the scroll proved to be quite accurate. I couldn't make out some of it towards the end, but I deciphered enough to activate the artifact. You see, Ian, may I call you Ian? The demon imprisoned in the gemstone is very much real. I will not speak its true name aloud, but they refer to it as the Cursed One and the Devourer of Men, amongst other names.
Maxwell stepped from the doorway and into the office, the glass crunching under his slippers.
Seller, I demand an explanation, and remove that amulet immediately.
I will do no such thing, you bloated walrus. Your words no longer hold any solidity here. I am the one who determines who goes on living and who will become fodder.
Oliver removed his feet from the desk in one quick movement and stood from the chair, the amulet being placed back inside his shirt.
You are finished here, Seller. Finished! I should have guessed you were unstable after those women came to me about you.
He turned from Oliver and marched to the door.
Security!
Eremonolus, I call thee. Eremonolus, I free thee. Eremonolus, I feed thee.
Maxwell stopped and turned back to the man as he shouted. His face grimaced in unbelievable amazement at Oliver's apparent insanity.
What?
Again, the door slammed closed and the desk light faded as it sucked all heat from the room and was replaced with a chilling cold. This time, Oliver did not cower into the room's corner, but remained standing proudly behind the desk as darkness enveloped the room and the summoned being was released. Maxwell backed up until he was against the door, so frightened at the sight unfolding before him that the very thought of trying the doorknob was swept away. As before, the dark being rose from the void in the floor, gradually making its appearance into the realm of man. Its height grew until its horns reached the ceiling, and still Oliver did not turn away. He needed to see, to witness the wanton feeding firsthand, especially now that Maxwell had entered into the scenario. Oliver found his fists clenched in eager anticipation. Maxwell's face bore the same terrifying mask that Lamaker had worn prior to his demise, his arms outstretched against the door for support as the black shape loomed over him. His screams filled Oliver's ears like a symphony as the demonic consumption started. The robe and undergarments were ripped away easily in a vicious tearing as the rending of the flesh itself followed. Oliver watched with a hypnotic fascination as it quickly devoured Maxwell, leaving not the slightest portion of his being intact. He simply vanished into the ravished maw of the skull-like head of the devourer of men. Once Maxwell had been consumed, the demon slid back into the floor as slowly as it had emerged, leaving no trace of its existence behind. The light soon returned as the chill departed, and even the office door slowly reopened. Oliver finally exhaled. What he had bore witness to was nothing short of an infernal miracle. He found himself laughing out loud. With his newly acclaimed might, the possibilities were endless. He would need to contemplate a strategy and plan out the direction of his newly given life.
Endless possibilities,
he muttered to himself. He touched the amulet beneath his shirt and laughed again.
Ollie?
Her voice abruptly dispersing his illusions of grandeur. He looked up to see Christina standing in the open doorway. She wore a gray tweed coat with the hem of a black skirt hanging just below the coat's bottom, her hair thrown hastily up into a bun, her face without makeup.
What happened?
She asked as she eyed up the room in the broken case and glass. Her sudden appearance had caught him off guard, and he took a moment to gather himself before he spoke.
There seems to have been a break-in.
Where are the police and security? Has Mr. Maxwell been informed?
She cautiously stepped into the office, careful to avoid the broken shards of glass about the carpet.
They are in the security office phoning the police,
he said calmly as he prepared himself for the second part of his plan.
But I thought you said that the police were already here. You said they wished to speak to me.
Oliver chuckled at his blunder.
Yes, I did, didn't I? I guess I didn't choose my words carefully enough. You caught me. What can I say?
He shrugged and smiled.
I don't understand. What's going on?
Oliver started to move from behind the desk.
Christina, what would you say if I could give you anything you ever wanted? You could walk away from this menial job and come away with me. We could live anywhere with no financial burdens or worries. Paris, Rome, Madrid, anywhere you like.
What?
She took a step back as she sensed all was not what it seemed to be.
Where's security? Mr. Maxwell needs to be informed of this.
Maxwell and security are no longer an issue. They're like the Holy Roman Empire. History.
He moved closer.
I'm going to get security.
Her sentence cut short as Oliver lunged at her and grabbed her by her upper arms. His actions were sudden and forceful, his grip tight.
I'm asking you, Christina. Come away with me and you'll never have to want again. We can live like royalty.
Oliver, you're hurting me.
Be with me.
He pulled her close and forcefully kissed her on the mouth. Instantly, her teeth clenched and her lips tightened against his probing tongue. She felt his grip lessen, and she yanked one of her arms free and struck him across the face. He released her and stepped back, rubbing the side of his face. Before she could react, he struck her across the mouth with the back of his hand. She fell backwards, her head narrowly missing the edge of the casing. In the fall, her coat and skirt had lifted, revealing her thighs and red silk panties. Oliver's pulse raced as he stared. He would have her regardless of her willingness. Dropping to his knees, he placed himself between her legs to prevent them from closing.
I will have you,
he said, and as he proceeded to lower himself onto her, something struck him in the jaw with a powerful blow. He fell to the carpet and could feel Christina moving away. His jaw throbbed, and the tip of his tongue played with the loosened teeth in his gums. He spit out the one that had been knocked loose to the floor and tasted the coppery tang of blood in his mouth. He looked up and saw her crawling backwards to the wall, the riveting hammer clutched in her hand.
You whore!
He spit out blood along with his words as he stood to his feet.
Is that how you want it?
Once on his feet, he took a few steps back and touched the amulet beneath his shirt. Christina was also making her way to her feet.
All I needed was its name.
His fingers were caressing the amulet through the shirt's material.
That's all. Just its true name to make me all-powerful. Like Juliet said to Romeo, what's in a name?
He laughed.
Everything.
Taking one more lengthy step backwards to clear himself of its arrival, he began.
Eremonolus I call thee,
Eremonolus, I free thee! Eremonolus, I feed thee!
As twice before, the door swung closed with a slam, startling Christina. The room slipped into an unnatural darkness as the very air itself was drained of its warmth. She could now see her breath between her fearful panting. Her eyes widened in horror as a shape began to rise from a black pit that had materialized in the floor. She looked up to Oliver. He was entranced by the sight and seemed momentarily oblivious to her. Whatever nightmare was about to unfold, she had to flee before it was too late. She rushed at Oliver and brought the hammer down at his face. Her actions had alerted him from his trance at the last second, and he pulled his head back to avoid the hammer. Instead of connecting with the bridge of his nose, the hammer fell onto his chest in a crushing blow. The metal of the hammer's head struck against metal in an audible clang. She fell to the floor as the black shape continued growing only a few feet from her. Oliver stumbled back until he fell into the desk. He quickly ripped the front of his shirt open. She could see the amulet that was once in the glass case around his neck. Oliver's face twisted in disbelief as the cracked ruby fell away from the amulet in pieces. In a futile effort, he attempted to hold the shattered stone together with his fingers, but the stone's integrity was no more. The demon was at its full height now, and the massive form loomed over Christina. Her mouth fell open in a quiver and spasm. The thick obsidian skull head, with its rows of long pointed teeth, emitted a deep, hellish groan. Christina felt consciousness on the verge of leaving her at the very side of the infernal horror. It stood silently, its large shoulders rounded forward like some hulking prehistoric simian. Then its head turned from the female to Oliver. The sound it emitted this time was more of a menacing growl. It spoke only 2 words in a voice so deep and ominous that the air itself seemed to quake.
Liberator, depart.
With a slight gesture of its clawed hand, the door swung open, revealing the lit foyer beyond, where the secretary's desk sat, and the hallway behind it. Without conscious effort, she scrambled on all fours for the open door. Oliver watched her with a fear-stricken face. He reached out in her direction with his hand.
Christina!
But she had already cleared the doorway and was scrambling to her feet, rushing out into the hall. The door then slammed closed once more, plunging the room into darkness. Oliver turned his gaze from the sealed exit to the shape that was now turning to face him. He whimpered. The skull head opened its growing maw like an enormous bear trap, displaying the long spear-like canines. From somewhere deep down inside its gullet, the glow of a raging fire flickered. Oliver's whimpering turned into a mixture of cries and a maniacal laugh. He laughed as his head entered the flaming mouth. That was What's in a Name by Frederick Pangbourne. A good reminder to be selective of your pets. Demons, for example, they'll turn on you. A little about the author. Frederick Pangbourne was a short story author with over 100 stories to his credit, and the majority of them in publication. He was a retired law enforcement officer and former U.S. Marine. And again, a special thanks to his brother Robert Pangbourne, who's partnered with us to keep Frederick's legacy going. Robert himself is an amazing artist who we hope you'll check out. You can find him on Facebook as RF Pangbourne. That's simply spelled Pangborn, not the eldritchy way Fred spelled it to throw everyone off. And at Pangbourne RF at Instagram. Check the show notes for a link to his Instagram. His paintings are genuinely horrifying. Thanks, Robert, and thanks, Fred. Gone but not forgotten, my friend.
And do old Drew Blood a favor, would you? Subscribe to his podcast wherever you do your listening and leave him a 5-star review and a kind word, even if you're listening on YouTube. He needs soldiers on all fronts to win this battle, and he appreciates it. To hear a premium ad-free edition of tonight's and all the other episodes, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click Patrons in the upper menu. You'll find yourself at chillintalesfordarknights.com, where you can become a patron for as little as $5 per month and get access to their entire audio archive, all ad-free and available to download or stream. Thank you for your time and for supporting our sponsors. When you support our sponsors, you support this show. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chillin' Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all the latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with them each and every week. Oh, and you can find Drew Blood on Facebook and Instagram, and sometimes Twitter. The Drew Blood's Dark Tales podcast is accepting submissions, friend. If you've got a story or two you'd like to be featured on the show, send it to drewbloodhorror@gmail.com. If selected, you'll get the full treatment, 10 bananas.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we part ways, at least till next week. So grab a drink for the... Wait a minute. Chester! Did you eat my hard mints? God help us. Well, may the wind be at your back, and may the road rise up to meet you. And make damn sure your shoes are tied before you leave, 'cause I don't suggest you bend over till you're well off property. Run for it, pal! And go fuck yourself! Whew! Good night, y'all.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.